Hey folks, welcome. Here we are. Finally, we've reached the lecture on yoga. We're going to talk about, as I said in the last lecture, we're going to talk about the application of the philosophy of Vedanta, the philosophy of Hinduism more broadly. We're going to talk about how do you realize your true nature as Brahman? Because thus far we've talked a lot about the philosophy, the core belief system, which includes, going back to the first video, the metaphysics. What do Hindus think exists? The epistemology, how do we know what we know? Different ways. And actually the epistemology connects a bit to the yoga, because yoga is one way we know it. But then also the values, how should we treat others? What is our duty in light of our dharma, our place in the grand scheme of things? What is our duty in light of the karma, the causes that we build, and the mutually arising causes that produced us, and so forth. So we've covered all that, and we're now moving into yoga, which again is really the question of how do we reach moksha, right? Moksha is that level of awakening when you reintegrate. Actually, reintegrate isn't the right word, because reintegrate suggests that you were something separate to begin with. The whole principle behind Brahmanatman is that you realize your true nature. You always were Brahman, right? You always were part of the ocean. It's just that the Maya created this field of illusion, this veil of illusion as it's defined, preventing you from seeing your true nature. So in a way, it's more that you're finally looking inwardly at your true self. That's what moksha is, or enlightenment in Buddhism, as I've already talked about. So how do we do that? Yoga, right? Yoga. And those of you who've done the reading, you know that it can be quite complicated. There's 4 central different types of yoga. And among Raja Yoga, there's a subdivision called Ashtanga. It's not really a subdivision. It's more of a Ashtanga Yoga isn't a new kind of yoga. Ashtanga Yoga is a specific way of achieving Raja Yoga, or Raja meaning royal or kingly, the king yoga. And we'll talk about that in the next video. But first, let's talk a little bit about the way we understand yoga in the West. And in the West, of course, we think of yoga in terms of body movements and strengthening your core and downward dog poses, and the 30 people in a room on yoga mats looking up at the teacher doing the different movements and instructing them on what to do. Nothing wrong with that. I've done yoga. I think it's a good thing. That in the Hindu tradition would be referred to as Hatha Yoga, which is a subdivision of Raja, as we'll see later. Yoga in the Hindu tradition is much broader. It includes what we would call meditation and many other things that we'll get into. I think it's kind of interesting to think too about, those of you who have taken yoga, think about how your teacher sets it up. Some teachers kind of explicitly, they don't connect it to any of the philosophy of Hinduism or anything in the East. They just, and sometimes they'll explicitly say that. They'll say, hey, look, I'm not poo-pooing that stuff. I'm just saying all I want to do is do some body work and get healthier and strengthen our bodies and so forth, which again is fine. Other teachers will connect it. They will use some of the concepts and terms that I've been using here and that are used in the Hindu tradition on some level. And so again, nothing wrong either way. It's just kind of giving you a connection to the yoga that we're talking about. But before I go through and define the term yoga and give you some of the etymological roots of the word, which I think are helpful to understand it, I want to take us all the way back to the first video in this class on Hinduism. Not the first video per se, but the first one where I started talking about Hinduism. And I talked about the difference between dualism and non-dualism. Just a quick refresher, dualism is the way we typically understand things in the West. There's God and his creation, right? There's the body and the soul. There's a separation. There's literally 2 different types of substances in the universe. Another way to say it is typically in Christianity and Islam, we all have an individual soul, and that soul is made of sort of soul stuff that is different from physical body stuff. They're 2 metaphysically distinct categories. Non-dualism says it's all one, right? Hence the name. No dualism, nothing dual. There may be the appearance of difference that is created, as I've talked about, through the veil of illusion and Maya unfolding. It makes us seem and feel like we're separate. But in Hinduism and Vedanta in particular, the goal is really to realize you're not truly separate, and that you really were the ocean already. You felt like you were a wave that was on top of the ocean, kind of doing your own thing. But fundamentally, moksha or enlightenment in Buddhism would be to realize that you're not just the wave, you are the ocean. That it was just an illusion. It was just Maya convincing you that you existed only as the wave. And so I wanted to restate that main point, because yoga is about helping you get back to that full realization of who you are. Right? Yoga is about helping you get back to that point. Okay. In other words, helping you realize your true nature. So what does yoga mean? The translation that's usually given is that yoga means to integrate, right? Or to join, to unify, to connect, to bring together. Another word I like that's not a direct translation, but it is what we would call the etymology, the origin of the word, is to yoke something, right? To put a yoke on an animal. Not an egg yolk, right? Y-O-K-E in English, not Y-O-L-K, right? The latter is egg yolk. We're talking about like a yoke. So think of the way a farmer will put on an oxen or whatever animal they're using. They'll put a harness on it to be able to control it and help them plow the fields and do their work. And then let's think about that process. What actually happens when a farmer puts a yoke on an animal like that? Well, the animal is a wild animal, right? And so the animal obviously is going to have to be on some level tamed in a way that doesn't harm it, but also works with its nature. So when a farmer puts a yoke on an animal, they are taming its wild nature, right? They are taming there's nothing else to say there. They're taming its wild nature. They are taming its natural tendencies so that it can be guided and they can use that nature towards the right end. Similarly, a yogi, one who practices yoga, is taming the wild nature of human beings. Right? It's taming the wild nature of you and me, of our body mind. And remember, from the perspective of Hinduism, we sure as hell need taming. Because like I said in the last video, or one of the last two, the Maya and the ego, it's like mud. Right? It's what keeps people, from this perspective, continuing on the cycle of samsara. You can't get away from the ego. It sticks to you. So therefore, yoga, the yogi, is yoking you the way he would yoke an animal to tame your wild nature so that he can guide you towards your true nature. Because your wild nature is really just part of your personality structure. It's really just Maya. Your true nature is deep connection with all things. It's the Brahman, the Brahmanatman, right? Like I always say, everything goes back to Brahman. So that's the way to think about the yogi, is it's the aim is this unity towards Brahman, which is what yoga means, again, to bring together, but it's done just like in a farmer taming an animal. We're taming our minds, we're taming our bodies, we're taming our tendencies toward ego, our tendencies toward identification with Maya. There's nothing wrong with Maya. The problem is identification with Maya. Okay, so I just want to give you an overview of the 4 paths of yoga, or the 4 different paths in Hinduism, as they're sometimes called. And you can see these discussed in chapters 4 and 5 of the Bresnan book. But the 4 yogas are really different ways of taming, right? They're different ways of taming people. And as we'll see in the next video, there's different people that have to be tamed on different levels. We all have different personality types that can be categorized. And according to Hinduism, there's different yogas that meet the person at the level at which they're at, right? So for instance, the first yoga, jnana yoga, is more associated with the intellect, right? It's more associated with the mind and learning and knowledge, which some people are connected to. And again, I'll talk about that in the next video. The karma yoga, we already learned that karma is the field of action, cause and effect. So not surprisingly, karma yoga is about action and doing, right? It's about applying knowledge rather than reading about it, applying it. And some people need to be met at that level. And then bhakti yoga, very popular around the world, whether they use that term or not. Bhakti yoga is devotion, devotional yoga. And so this is where you'll see, if you've ever seen those videos of people doing mantras or chants, This is bhakti yoga, where people are trying to concentrate on something to tame their what's sometimes called the monkey mind, right? If I haven't mentioned that term before, the monkey mind, there's actually I forgot the exact word in Sanskrit, goes back many years in the Hindu tradition in India. The monkey mind, because India is a place with lots of monkeys, right? And monkeys like to jump around and throw stuff and sometimes throw literally shit, depending on the monkey. So they're using that as a metaphor, just like any culture uses its surrounding as a metaphor. And they say our minds are like that. Our minds are like monkeys jumping around, right? Anytime any of you have tried to meditate, if you haven't meditated before, it's hard to stay still for even like 20 seconds at the beginning because your mind is shooting in every different direction. That's the monkey mind. That's what we're trying to tame. That's what's pulling you away from the Brahman, right? Is the monkey mind. And one of my favorite metaphors is the idea, it's not just a monkey mind, it's a monkey who's been bit by a scorpion. Right? Imagine that image. You have a monkey that's already very energetic jumping around and a scorpion, pinches it, and now it's jumping around even crazier and it can't control itself and it's screaming. That's an even better metaphor with how untamable, not literally, but how seemingly untamable our minds are. So anyways, that's the connection to bhakti. That's why devotion is so important, because it can bring our monkey mind back under control. But the most, the king yoga, Raja Yoga, which is for many Hindus the ultimate yoga, which includes meditation and includes this entire path of Ashtanga that guides somebody towards samadhi, which I'll talk about in the next video, which is ultimately leading you to moksha, to true union. Again, union's the wrong phrase, I keep using it. To true awareness of who you truly are, which is Brahman. So that's Raja Yoga. And we'll talk all about that in the next video of how to do that. Now, I do want to mention one other thing that I think is interesting, which is the connection of all this to the Bhagavad Gita, which you're going to be reading soon. And you'll see that it's already mentioned in the chapters you're reading. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, there's two main characters who are having a conversation, and that's really what the whole thing's about. But it begins with this guy Arjuna being carried out in a chariot by Krishna into the battlefield to survey the battlefield. And Krishna, it's no accident. There's deep symbolism here that Krishna is a charioteer, which was a well-respected tradition, a well-respected job at that time, right? A well-respected profession is the word I was looking for at that time. Something that people trained many, many years to be able to, if you're the chariot rider, especially if you're in a war, you'd have somebody fighting and shooting arrows and stuff. As you're riding the chariot, you have to be able to guide that through the battlefield. That takes incredible skill. So anyway, he's a chariot rider, but there's a connection here to a yogi, isn't there? Because just in the same way you have to control the animal as a farmer and yoke the animal and put the yoke on the animal, the charioteer has to be able to yoke and control and be a yogi with respect to the chariot. And so there's no small symbolism there that the advice that ends up coming from the charioteer, who is Krishna, who ultimately, as you'll see, is an incarnation of the god Vishnu, his advice towards Arjuna, not a common person, but the person thinking about the battle, is similar to the advice of a yogi, a master who's trying to tame and help this other person understand their true nature, right? So it's no accident that he is a charioteer in the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so short video this time. I'll leave you there. Next time I'll go into depth on those 4 paths.